which is for our next exercise in Module 7, which is this module, we are going to be learning about salves and making salves. So let's go ahead and get started talking about what salves are. Salves are very similar to ointments. They have that same kind of consistency. They're typically with a clear base that's similar to petroleum jelly in its consistency. And salves have been used medicinally and magically for many, many years. Some medicinal uses for salves include wound care, cuts and abrasions, removing infection, drying out infection, sore muscles, breaks, sprains. Some salves are even used to clear up congestion, like some of your more mentholated scented salves can help do that, break up congestion in the lungs and clear out nasal passages. They can also be used as antiseptics and antibiotics. So those are just some of the medicinal uses for salves, and there's also some magical applications for them as well. Probably the most famous witch salve is going to be flying ointment. And if you're not familiar with flying ointment, it's been used by witches for decades. It's used by witches to help aid in astral projection. And there's some really interesting folklore that surrounds flying ointment and how it got its name. It was rumored that flying ointment is what witches would use to put on their brooms to make their brooms fly, which is kind of goes into the old folklore of witches riding brooms across the sky. So flying ointment got its name from there. And it just is kind of funny to me. It's a testament to the mentality of people at the time. People were very, very literal. So while the name flying ointment to witches meant to astral project, to literally project their soul, their spirit into other realms and dimensions, people at the time, muggles at the time, automatically assumed that flying ointment meant that they were actually flying. And that's how we get that whole iconic view of witches riding broomsticks, which I think is pretty great. And flying ointment is probably the most famous of magical salves and ointments, but it is not where they end. So you can use salves for healing, protection, self-love. You can use them for exorcism and banishment of negative energies. You can use them for lust. There's a number of things that you can use, magically speaking, salves and ointments for. So next what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making 2 different salves. So you have your salve recipe sheets, and I hope that you have access to them and have them in front of you, as well as the PDF for this module. It's going to tell you step by step, but I'm also going to go ahead and show you. So if you are using a stock pot for your double boiler method, which is what I'm doing, you want to go ahead and put some water in it. And once you have your water in your stock pot or the inner container of your double boiler, you're going to want to go ahead and turn the heat on and get that water started boiling. As our water begins to heat up, we can go ahead and get the rest of our ingredients ready. So for this batch of all natural mosquito repellent salve, I'm actually going to use some citronella oil infusion that I've had for quite a long time. So it's ready to go. And of course, I'm going to strain it into a measuring glass using my cheesecloth. Now, if you don't already have citronella infused oil, then you're going to have to do one of 2 things. You're either going to have to use a double boiler method and make some with your base oil and some dried citronella, and then strain out the herbs for this next part before we get to this next part, or you're going to have to use some citronella essential oil. Either way, totally up to you. They will both work just as well. Now, if you are going to strain, go ahead and do that now. And if you're going to go ahead and do the double boiler method, pause this video and get started on that. So just a little quick review for those of you who are going to be straining some oil. So I put the cheesecloth in, I put the lid over it, and I'm just going to pour it, turn it over, and pour it directly into my glass measuring cup. This is the easiest way to do it because then I can just put this inside of the pot when we use the double boiler method. And also it has that lip on it, so I can use that lip to pour into my tins. This is the easiest, less mess way to go about it. And as you can see, I've only folded over my cheesecloth a couple of times, so the oil comes right through pretty quickly and fairly easy. I'm not going to be making a large batch, so this amount of oil is just perfect for me. So I am right at about a 1/4 cup. This is about a 1/4 cup. See if I can get a little bit closer to 1/2 cup. And one thing that I've noticed when I'm making this kind of salve specifically, I typically like to have it have a higher concentration of oil rather than wax. When you use a higher concentration of wax, you get more of like a balm, like a chapstick, and we want this to go on fairly easy. So in this case, you would want to use a little bit more oil. So that's why I'm going to try to get a little bit more in there. Alright guys, so now I've got it up to just a little bit over 1/2 cup, if you can see that. So that's perfect. And now we want to go ahead and get the rest of our ingredients prepared. Now, as I mentioned in the recipe list and items of things you'll need, you're going to want some beeswax or candilia wax that's broken up into little pieces. So what I do is I have a big block of beeswax, and I just take a butter knife and I cut it off into pieces. I usually get pretty good sized pieces like this, you can see, and then from there I just break it up into smaller pieces. You can just twist and it'll come off. Now the reason that you want to do that is because it makes the rest of the wax melt faster, and you ideally do want the wax to melt pretty quickly. You don't want to overcook your base oil or your oil infusion with the wax. You just want to use the heat enough to make everything meld and blend together. If you have it too high of a heat, what happens is, like we talked about with making infusion oils in the first place in the video, you're going to heat away and cook away a lot of the aromas and the flavors and all of those great herbal qualities that we're trying to capture in this salve. So it's counterproductive to our purpose. So once you get these guys broken up, now bear in mind, I'm not going to use all of this wax for this mix. I'm only going to use a little bit. This is probably more wax than I need for both salves because I'm not making a lot of them. I've only got 5 containers out, so I'm going to do 2 small batches. But I'm going to use this for both salves and probably have some left over. I'm still waiting for my water to heat up all the way, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my rosemary, I'm going to grab my geranium essential oil, and my lemon essential oil, and I'm going to set them aside. And I do like to use this brand, the Now brand of essential oils, and the reason I like them is because they're quality oils and they are very affordable. I find that those other oils like Young Living and stuff like that are typically pretty overpriced. Now that's not to say that if you already have those that those won't work, they absolutely will. But if you're somebody that doesn't have the means to purchase expensive oils, you can easily you can get by with using these. And I know they sell them here in Texas at HEB, but I've seen them at some other health food places, and I know they also have an online presence as well. Now we're just going to wait for our water to heat up. We don't want to wait for it to heat up to a complete boil. Once we start seeing some small bubbles, we'll go ahead and put our glass jar in there so that it's not such a shock to the glass container. We don't want to put it in the hot boiling water. We don't want our container to crack. So once we see that it's just getting a little bit warmer, we'll go ahead and put it in, and then we'll start slowly mixing in our wax. So now that I can kind of hear that the water's moving and I can see those little bubbles at the bottom, I'm gonna go ahead and put my glass measuring cup in the middle, just like we did when we were doing the oils. Just place this right in the middle here. And don't forget to have an oven mitt on hand. Don't try to grab that out of the middle of the stock pot later on. So I'm going to go ahead and just give this a few minutes and be sure to monitor it carefully. Again, I don't want it to get too hot and start cooking away that wonderful citronella aroma. And if you notice how green my oil was, that is a good indicator that the herbs have completely emulsified into the mixture. Okay, if you can see, we're starting to get some bubble action. It's starting to heat up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start to slowly add in my beeswax. I'm just going to do it a little bit at a time. I'm going to use my wooden spoon to stir. and just kind of watch as the wax melts, and if I need to add more, I'll add more. Okay friends, here we go. Just a little bit of small pieces. Add them in there. And monitor as they start to slowly melt, and just give them a couple of nice stirs to help it along. I pretty much stay consistently stirring as I'm doing this. I find that it tends to help the wax melt a little bit faster. And you can see that the wax is kind of pliable and it's changing colors, but it's not quite hot enough to melt all the way. So we'll just keep waiting and we'll just keep stirring. And by now you can start to see that some of the pieces are getting smaller, so they are melting. I still feel like we need some more wax, so I'll go ahead and add some in and continue to stir. Now, another good way to tell if you have enough wax is by your spoon. So see how the spoon is very, very oily at this point. It dries pretty quickly, but it's still very oily. We want it to have more of a wax consistency when we pull it up, and that's how we know it's closer to being done. A couple of good sized chunks. And let's stir it out. And another thing we're going to want to do is while we're getting this ready, and we've got our oils ready, we also want to get our containers ready, which means we want to go ahead and take those lids off because the next few steps are going to happen pretty quickly. Lids are off, containers are situated, so now let's go back over and see how our oil and our wax are doing. Looks like they're melting, we're coming along. Steady as she goes. Still a little bit oily. Now, I know those pieces haven't melted yet, so we don't want to get overzealous. One thing you can do too is you can always touch it and see where it's at in terms of how it feels. Still pretty oily. So if it was closer to a salve or ointment stage, it would leave kind of a wax residue. So we want to go ahead and add some more wax in. Add in some more wax and just keep stirring. Just continuously monitoring it and continuously checking to see it's getting a little thicker, and it's starting to get thicker. I'm starting to feel more of a waxy residue like that when I rub my fingers like that on it. So I'd say we're getting pretty close, but I am going to add just a little bit more, and that should be good enough. So let's see. Oh, see? There it goes. Looks like it's almost there. So let's go ahead and keep on stirring. As I continuously stir and monitor it, I'm also going to continue to do that little check. And it's kind of hard for me to show you guys in a close-up. So what you'll do is you'll just kind of put some on your hands, give it a few seconds, and you'll start to see that it kind of looks like paraffin or wax. And you'll also be able to peel it off like that. So that's how you know we're getting to more of a salve consistency. So we're good. Once this little bit of wax melts, we'll be ready to take this off of the heat. And once we take it off the heat, we're gonna add in our essential oils. And I typically just do that, I do that kind of like the folk method, really. I just put a couple of drops in, I stir, I smell until I get the fragrance that I want. Now, I do get pretty heavy-handed sometimes because I want this to be concentrated. The beeswax and the oil can tend to dilute it, and I really want this to work as an insect repellent, so the scent needs to be pretty strong. Just a few more seconds and we should be ready. All right, witches, so my wax has completely melted. I'm gonna go ahead and turn the heat off. And I'm also going to immediately pull my mixture out. Now go ahead and pull that water, that stock pot, off of the heat. We want for the water to be able to cool back down for our next batch of salve. Okay, so now this next part, what you're going to do is you're going to add in your essential oils. So I'm going to start with geranium. Geranium is really great at repelling mosquitoes, so I'm going to be pretty heavy-handed with this one. I'm just going to add a bunch of drops. And then I'm going to stir and smell. That's really nice. Lemon is also great for repelling mosquitoes. Sorry about my dog. She is whining at my feet. And that one's really smelling good too. I like to use rosemary also, but I don't like to use an overpowering amount of rosemary because it just kind of does better in this mixture as a subtle note. So I'm really, really liking the way that this is coming along. I'm gonna add just a little bit more geranium, and then I'm gonna go ahead and pour. Do one last stir. Don't forget your oven mitt for this part. And go ahead and pour into your containers. This is when that lip really comes in handy. And just one more. We've just got a little bit, so I'm gonna go ahead and top these guys off, but I don't want to overflow them. So now you're gonna wanna let yourself sit out and set for about 4 hours or so. Typically, I just let mine stay out all night, and then by the next morning, it's totally set and ready to go. But you don't have to wait that long. It should be dry enough and ready to put the lid on and store in as soon as 4 hours. All right, guys, and now we're gonna start making salve number 2. Now this salve is just a little bit different than the first one because we're gonna wing it. I'll tell you a little bit of backstory of why I wanted to create this salve. I published on my Facebook and social media accounts that I was going to be teaching this course and that I was in the process of wrapping it up. And a close friend of mine who is not a witch, total muggle, total Christian, but is super cool, like one of those really open-minded Jesus freaks that's like super down with whatever anybody chooses to do, right? So she reaches out to me and she tells me, you know, I know herbs are your thing, herbalism is your thing. I've got this really bad back and shoulder pain, and usually I go see a chiropractor, but it's just not really working for me anymore. Do you have anything, or can you make anything for me? And so when someone reaches out to me like that, it sends like fireworks off in my brain, and I start instantly trying to think about what I can do to help them and start going through my herb books and my references and this and that. And I do a lot of research on Pinterest. It's actually one of my favorite places to just find some different ideas of what people are doing out there with their herbs. I use that for canning and all kinds of homesteading and gardening hacks, and I suggest you guys do it too. So anyways, one thing that I had been wanting to try was a cayenne pepper salve. And a lot of the recipes that I saw were just calling for cayenne pepper, and sometimes in pretty large amounts. And the idea behind it is that the heat will help relieve the pain. So I didn't want to do one that super intense, but I also liked the idea of cold and hot at the same time, kind of like icy hot. And so that kind of got me started thinking about eucalyptus and spearmint. And then ginger can also be a heat additive, and it's also really great for the skin and really great for pain. And so I thought, just to make it nice and simple, I would do 4 ingredients. 3 of those would be essential oils, and then 1 would be the cayenne powder. Now, there's a couple ways that you could make this. You could go ahead and start emulsifying your cayenne pepper into the oil and let it set, or do the double boiler method, or any of those things prior to using the base oil. But today, what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna keep it simple. I'm gonna use about a half of a teaspoon of cayenne pepper powder. And I'm just gonna pour my oil in. And I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it. I'm not gonna do a whole lot. I really only wanna make a couple of canisters of this stuff. I wanna make 1 for her and 1 for me. So let's stir that up and see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and mix that up. It looks okay, but there's a lot more oil in there than there is cayenne. So let's live a little dangerously, and let's add some more cayenne. Now, I'll probably revamp this recipe several times before I get it exactly how I want it, but let's just try this. Ooh, nice and dark. That's so much better. That's really where I want it. And that isn't a whole lot of oil though. So I'm gonna add just a tiny smidgen more. And then we will leave that at that. So now that I've got my powder stirred into my oil, I'm gonna go ahead and put my water back on the heat again and turn that on. And then keep in mind that it's not going to take very long for that to get there, because we just took it off the heat. So it shouldn't take you very long to get there. Again, same as before, watch for a little bit of bubbles, and then we'll go ahead and put this in. While we wait for water to heat up, there are a couple of things that I want to touch on. Number 1, if you use too much cayenne pepper in this mixture, it will burn the skin. So keep that in mind. That's why I didn't want to go overboard with it. We want a heating sensation, but we don't want a burning sensation. And also remember, like always, ask anyone that you're preparing remedies for if they have allergies to any of the ingredients that you're using. So while I was formulating this recipe, I shot my friend a text and asked her, hey, do you happen to have any allergic reactions to the following? And she said no, so I knew we were good to go. Now, when I give it to her, I'll also warn her that same thing, that if she's going to share with somebody, a friend comes over, be sure to share that information with them as well. And another thing I want to touch on is there are some different variations of cayenne pepper salve, and some people like to make infusions with the peppers themselves. They cut the peppers up, put it in the oil, do the double boiler method, or the crock pot method, or the emulsification method. However, they do the infusion. You can do that too. I just felt like this was going to be a lot faster, a lot easier. I had cayenne pepper on hand, and it was a lot more time friendly, considering that this is something that I want relatively quick. One of my favorite things about creating salves is that once you get the technique down, you can literally use that same technique to make a number of salves. So now that you've learned this technique, you'll be able to make your own recipes and create your own oil infusions, strain those, and easily add beeswax or candilia wax or whatever your wax of choice is and make it into a salve. The possibilities really are endless. As with all herbalism, the only limitations are your own creativity and imagination. I wanted to show you guys real quick as we wait for our water to heat up is that these guys are already setting. This one did get a little bit wonky whenever I moved this stuff over off of my stove onto this area for it to dry, but as you can see, typically they would cool at a flush level if I had not moved them, but yeah, they cool and set pretty quickly. All right, I can see that there's some steam coming up. I'm gonna add in my glass measuring cup. And with this, I'm gonna wanna continue to stir as it heats up, because unlike the citronella infusion, this isn't infused. So we want to get this to a place where the oil and the cayenne powder is actually gonna mesh really well and meld together. So just continue stirring and continue monitoring the heat. So because the water was already hot from the last salve that we made, it started to boil pretty quickly. So I turned my heat down to a medium setting. I had it on medium high. I turned it down to a medium setting because I do want it to heat up inside, but I don't want to burn away anything. Okay guys, I was also feeling a little brave, so I went ahead and added some more powder in there. I took a little bit of the oil and I just rubbed it on my skin to see if it would feel hot, and I really didn't feel anything, so I added just a little bit more. Alright guys, I'm ready to start adding my wax in. So go ahead and grab your wax and let's add it in a little bit at a time. A good amount. That's a good place to start. So now we will stir, just like we did before. And just continue stirring just like you did before, and you're going to be looking for the same characteristics that you looked for with the last salve. So you'll begin to pick your spoon up and you'll start to see, once the wax starts melting, you'll start to be able to see that it's kind of leaving a coat on the spoon, and you can put some on your fingers, and if you're able to flake it off kind of like wax, like when you get wax on a finger from a candle or something, then you know you've gotten it to where you need it to be in terms of consistency with your wax and oil ratio. And if you wanted your pain relief salve to be thicker and to be more like a chapstick or more waxy, hard, to require more pressure to apply it, then you would add more wax. If you wanted to keep yours a little bit more viscous, a little bit more on the oily side, then of course you would use less wax. Alright, so we can see, even though this is darker than our last mixture, we can see that the wax is starting to melt. Alright friends, I doubt we have enough wax in there melted for us to be able to do the same finger test, but let's try it. Put a little on your finger. Oh. So surprisingly, it looks like it's getting more and more waxy. See that? I can actually pull a little flake off. Good deal. Oh, also when you're making this, if you rub it on your hands, make sure you wash your hands, because I don't have to tell you if you've ever cut peppers before, it can be really, really nasty when you cut peppers. Don't wash your hands and touch your eyes or other areas. So same applies when you're working with these kinds of herbal mixtures and mixes with spices. You always want to wash your hands when dealing with anything spicy or mentholatum or anything like that. I added just a little bit more wax, and that's almost melted, and like you can see, I have some wax left over, so I can use this for an upcoming project. Go ahead and set this aside so it doesn't get too hot and melt in this bowl. Like I said, I added just a little tiny bit more wax to my mixture because it wasn't consistently giving me that flake off, that waxy flake off. So I added a little bit more, and now it's a little closer to where I want it to be. It's almost completely melted, and as soon as it does, I'm going to take it off the heat, and we'll begin to add in our essential oils before we pour into our tins. All right, everyone, I've turned off my heat. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out and put it over here. And let's add our oils in. All right, guys, it's starting to get hot in here and we wanna move quickly through this part. So we're gonna start adding our ginger essential oil. A good amount, be sure to be pretty generous with it. Our eucalyptus oil. And same, we're gonna be generous with it. And I'm not expecting for this to have an amazing aroma because I'm going more for effect, what it's gonna be able to do. So it's actually probably gonna smell a little weird with this mixture. But like I said, I expect to make some revisions and revamp this recipe as time goes on. This is just our preliminary run to see what it's like. Actually, not too bad. And a little bit more of everything. Stir, and now we're ready to pour. Okay guys, just a little bit of stirring. I've got some residue of powder at the bottom. I want to make sure to break that up and get that infused really good into the mixture before we pour it in. All right. It was a pretty good job on estimating how much it would take to fill up 2 of these containers. I'm pretty proud of that. And I was also able to get most of that cayenne pepper residue out of the bottom, which means that it made its way into the salve. Just like our other salves, our natural mosquito repellent salves, we're gonna go ahead and let this sit. I'm not gonna move this because I want it to sit as flush as possible. We'll come back and check on this one a little bit. In the meantime, let's see how our other salves are doing. Oh yeah, these guys are pretty good, and it hasn't even been 2 hours. I think the heat in this kitchen is kind of helping the liquids dry out. So these are ready to have their lids put on them and to be labeled. Now I would continue to leave them in a place where they can sit flush, that way it dries completely, but you are able to move them at this point if you would like to. All right, that concludes Module 7 on salves. Next in Module 8, we're going to explore poultices, what they're used for, and a couple of different methods you can use to make them. So head on over to the PDF associated with Module 8, start reading, and then head on over to the video.